Our lecture today is about the timeline of creation in the Quran. The timeline of creation, starting from the early creation of the universe up to the end of the 6 days. In our lecture today, we will discuss from the beginning, the early creation, up to the second day of the timeline. Actually, the timeline according to the Quran is different than that of the science, because it depends on two creations: the early creation of the universe and the creation in 6 days. While that of the science, it depends on the particle physics or quantum physics, as the universe was smaller than, or it was smaller than the atom before the creation of the atom, and after the creation of the atom, the macrophysics or the relativity and other theories of Einstein applied. So this is the difference between the two timelines. The timeline of creation according to the Quran started with the creation of the primary things, which were postponed to the crack time, had their properties, and were categorized within housings in the throne. The next stage, the crack happened, and then after, the primordial water. These primary things, when the crack happened, became alive, and they brought in to the universe bubble through the crack, ending as primordial water. When the primordial water completely existed, the throne became above that primordial water, and the creation in 6 days started. The creation in 6 days started with day 1 of creation of the skies and the earth, and day 1 of creation of the 7 skies. The creation of the skies and the earth started with the perfection of the bends of the primary things. So the first step of the creation of day 1 was the perfection of the bends in the primary things. When that happened, the first thing split from the primary things, opposite primary things, was the negative pressure particle. This negative pressure particle, or the gravity particle, when split, it could split the first force from the splitting combining force, which is the super forces, the gravity. So it could split the gravity, and by that the buildup of the sky began, and buildup of the gravity sky began, and its first inflation began with it. At the same stage, here we have the opposite primary things had more perfection, so that the parts split from the primary things, forming the dark matter of each kind. So the next stage, the dark matter existed. When the dark matter, or as much as dark matter existed, as much as a wind existed. So when splitting of the dark matter happened, it was accompanied by a stormy wind. That stormy wind increased as much as the dark matter split from the primary things, until they came at their max when all the dark matter existed. Then after, annihilation of the opposite matter happened, and when that happened, the dark energy or that stormy wind started to decay until when the annihilation happened, this one became calm and ended as effectless. When annihilation finished, there was a residue remained in this universe bubble. This residue is composed of the kinds of primary things that were opposite but could match with each other, like their resonance in vibration, a resonance in the like a resonance in their vibration could exist. So the matching opposite particles or primary things existed in addition to the dark matter. So here we have opposite primary things that could match with each other in addition to dark matter. When matching between these particles was gradually happening, increasing, that decayed wind, which turned almost to zero, started to become more effective. Started to increase and become more effective, and when all the primary things matched with each other, and the primary system in the universe, the primary system and the pair system, when the pair system in the universe started, the decaying wind or the dark energy became at its max. At the end of this stage, this energy, this wind, could split another force from the super forces, which is the strong nuclear force. When the strong nuclear force combined with the action of this wind started to raid over the matter, the primordial water, the first thing it raised a smoke. The smoke, it is the source of that wind, stormy wind, which is the dark matter. So the first stage, it was mixed with the primordial water. When that force started to raid over it, it was raised above the primordial water. The next stage, the strong nuclear force and this wind started to glue the primary things, pairs of primary things together, forming the mixed matter or the symmetries of matter. Then it was followed by, now we have the gravity and strong nuclear force were used within the primordial water, and the remaining of that combined force was the weak force. The weak force surrounded the symmetries. The weak force surrounded the symmetries. The next stage began the conveyed consecutively as the strong nuclear force was completely used in forming and gluing the symmetries. This wind remained as strong wind, stormy wind, and it split into many winds. Each acted on the pairs of primary things that doesn't belong to the matter. Some of them belong to the weak force, weak nuclear force, and some of them belong to the photons, some of them belong to the living things. So it acted on them individually and could split them from the mixed or the symmetry of the matter. It started with the shallow ones and ended with the deep ones. So the first one was the stormer's wind. It could split the shallow particles from the symmetry, could be the W, could be the Z, or could be the electrons. The second one, the spreading wind, which split the deeper, which could be any of those weak nuclear force particles. And the third one, the separating wind, it also could split the deepest, which could be the electrons. Then, when the splitting of these particles finished, these winds ended. So what remained was the reciter's wind. The reciter's wind could split the angels, could split the excuser's wind, could split the animals, and the warner's wind could split the humans and bashar. These winds completely finished now, and what remained, the split of the deepest particles, the photons. Another wind actually was existed, which is the Plucker's wind. The Plucker's wind could split the photons, which is the deepest in the symmetry. The first step after splitting the photons, the energized, which electrons, when the photons were plucked or split from the symmetry, the electrons of the weak force started to get energized. Then the photons started, the plucked photons or split photons started to swim freely in the space, and then scattering and recombination started to happen. Under the effect of the Plucker's wind, the scattering and recombination started to happen. The electrons took their place in the atoms of the baryonic atom, and the photons started to combine with the electromagnetic force. After scattering and recombination, there was a release of foamy bubbles. The foamy bubbles contain the matter, the atoms of matter, which could be the hydrogen and the helium, and raise them up towards the dark matter, which was on top of the primordial water, or hovering over the primordial water. It raised them to combine with the dark matter, forming the dark matter gaseous cloud. Now, when the dark matter gaseous cloud completely existed, blower's wind started. Here, interaction between the atoms and the dark matter started, which made the dark energy increases again, forming the blower's wind. the interaction of the blower's wind with the gaseous dark matter gaseous cloud resulted in the burden carriers, which became later the walls in between the voids of the universe, and the free flowers, which is the dark energy and what it took with it. So we have the blowers of the burdens. The blower's wind was divided into many winds. The first one, the blower of the burden winds that could split or make the burden carriers, then followed by the blowers of the free flowers, which freed the flowers which are the dark matter of the dark matter gaseous cloud. Then the blower wind could split the gravity into positive gravity and negative gravity. It divided the gravity into positive and negative. At this stage, blower wind is still acting, galaxies started to form. Galaxies started to form. At the stage when the galaxies started to form, the web of the universe, or the web sky, or the network sky started to form. And then the sky that has the networks, it was not one network, so many webs. So when they completed, there was a sky of the webs existed. At this stage, only the galaxies were forming. Now, the following stage of the creation of the seven skies, another sky started to exist. Now we have the gravity sky and we have the sky of the network. Then we have the towers of galaxies. The galaxies started to combine together, forming towers on top of each other, exactly at the corners between the voids, between voids and another, forming the walls and filaments. So when the towers of galaxies began to exist, early stars started to exist. Until these early stars aged and started to die, they exploded and formed the suns and stars, smaller stars, and the planets and Earth, celestial objects and Earth. At this stage, the three of them existed. The creation of the galaxies continued. The creation of the planets or celestial objects and the Earth started, and the creation of the stars and suns started. When the Earth existed, this was the end of the first day of creation, of the timeline of creation, and the start of the second day. The start of the second day began with the differentiation and molding of the rocks of the Earth. The Earth was molten and differentiation began, and molding the rocks started to form on its crust. Then in a next stage, water descended from the sky, making the first ice age, which covered the whole earth, cooled it down and made its surface to materialize and turned it alive. Solidify and turned it alive. At the same stage here, we have the sun. The sun started its dawn stage, giving little or faint light that shined on the earth, made a difference in its darkness. So the sun and the earth were created together. But this stage was the early stage, the first stage of creation of the sun. It was not shining, it was just accreting the gases. The next stage, the dawn stage, it started to shine, beginning with the faint light that made a difference on the surface of the earth. After descending of the water and solidifying the earth crust and turning it alive, there was a disperse of mobile creatures. The matter accreted with the during the earth formation included some mobile creatures, maybe bacteria, maybe something smaller than the bacteria, but things existed with that that matter, and started to disperse when the earth turned alive. The next stage was the discharge of the wind and clouds of debris. After the accretion finished and the earth had its crust cooled and materialized, there was a dust, clouds of dust surrounding the earth, accompanied by high wind. This high wind and cloud of dust started to be discharged and dispersed away. At the end of this stage, the creation of the towers of the galaxies continued. We have here this arrow represents that when the gravity split into positive and negative, the blowers wind pushed away the galaxies and the dark matter gases class components away from the gravity. So as much as it goes in the direction of the opposite gravity, the gravity diminished in them. Gravity gradually diminished, decreased, and it caused the activities of the universe to slow down, and it caused the universe to cool very much, or to become very cool. So that's why the first ice age happened, because the gravity was little, and that the cosmos temperature became very low, that could start the ice age at this period. The towers of galaxies continued in its creation, which is driven by the blower's wind. and the sun was still at its dawn stage. On the other side here, the creation of the skies and the earth. Here at this stage, the galaxies, the creation of the galaxies ended. The sun and stars, and here is the earth and the celestial objects. When the creation of the galaxies ended, that doesn't mean that everything existed inside, but them as a unit, as a galaxy, as a unit, was completely existed and no more were forming. But inside of them, the dust and the dark matter still not completely formed into stars and sky objects or celestial objects. So at this stage, a dwarf planet, as the science says, and in the Quran it doesn't specify what kind of object that hit the earth, but there was an object that impacted the earth and caused a bulge in it and turned the earth dead again. The impact caused the eject of debris to the space surrounding the earth, caused the grassland and the water to come out from inside the earth, and some objects that were ejected into the space started to fall back into the earth as sustenance. Now, after the impact and the stages that we talked about, the eject, the falling down of objects and the bringing out of the grassland and the water, in the galaxies, complete objects could be observed, like stars and planets. We could see or observe some of them completely existed and shining in the galaxy. After this stage, there was another disperse of mobile creatures, and at the same time, the earth or the sources that make up the human creation, which is the water and dust, were getting prepared to be the right sources that can make him created, that can be used in his creation. So there was another disperse of mobile creatures, and there was a preparation for the dust and water to be the right one for the human creation. Then that the debris surrounded the earth in space was discharged, and from that the moon was formed. At the end of this stage, the day 2 of creation ended, and the start of the day 3, which began with the formation of the mountains in the earth. This is the end of our lecture today, and thank you for listening.